Hey there, thanks for tuning in. Lars has again joined me to continue the series on Hellenistic astrology, and today we are going to discuss the lots. Lots. I think we have spoken a lot about lots, and we have also tried our hands in terms of discovering or inventing the new lots. So it's not a very alien concept to us. So welcome, Lars. Thanks for
Right.
joining me again.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. Cool.
So the lots.
All right. Yeah, the lots. So there's lots and lots of these lots.
Yeah, and we have lots to talk about the
We
lots.
have lots to talk about the lots. Yeah. So lots are also more popularly known as Arabic parts because for a while people thought they were invented by the Arabs, but more recent scholarship in the past 30 years or so revealed that they were actually dating back to earlier Hellenistic authors. And Hellenistic doesn't actually mean like Greek. It means basically, again, as we've talked about in other videos, like astrologers writing in Greek in the
Yeah.
Hellenistic period in places like Egypt and Lebanon and probably Persia and so on, a few different places. And the doctrines are fairly similar. So the lots is one of these like key doctrines of Hellenistic astrology, and they are basically just a mathematical point derived by adding, by taking the distance from one point, let's say a planet, it's usually a planet, right? So like the lot of fortune is the most like widely used and perhaps the most fundamental of all the lots for all the Hellenistic astrologers. So let's start with that, right? You take the distance from the sun to the moon and find whatever that mathematical distance is, and then you add that to the ascendant and you get this point, which is called the lot of fortune. And that calculation by most Hellenistic authors is reversed in a night chart. So if the person was born at night, you reverse the calculation and you start with the moon as the starting point, take the distance from the moon to the sun, find that mathematical distance, and then add that to the ascendant and get the lot of fortune. Although on a side note, recently I think I've decided to switch back to not reversing the calculation.
Based upon the sect.
Yeah, based upon sect, I'm going to mess around with that and see how I like it. But traditionally, it does reverse, and many of the lot calculations do reverse, whether it's a day or night chart. And the sources and the authors will tell you that, and so on. So that's what they are. But we also want to know what they do. And I think one thing to understand is like why are they called lots, and why were they later called parts? Well, I guess parts or pars in Latin was some sort of Latin transliteration of the Greek term for lots. I don't really know the history of why that became what it is, but lots in Greek is kleroi. And I think I'm pronouncing it right, like kleroi, Kleroi or something like that. And
I think that's it. Yeah.
yeah, and so it makes a little more sense when you start to think about the age-old practice of casting lots. And in an essay I wrote for the Ascendant Volume 2, published by the Association of Young Astrologers, for those interested, I wrote an article on lots, and I talked about like not only Plato's myth of air, in which people select lots that basically define their fate when they incarnate into a new life, but also the notion of casting lots, like in the Gospels, for example. There's several points where the disciples of Christ cast lots. So like they maybe would roll dice or throw some kind of I don't really know. I don't really know what they did back then, but the easiest to understand is like throwing dice, right? You're like casting lots, like who gets what, and they do that. There's a few times in the Gospels where they, or maybe it's just in the New Testament in general, where they cast lots, right? They like cast lots to see who gets like this piece of clothing, or they cast lots to see who will be the new 12th of the disciples of Christ after Judas is dead, and so on. And the idea is that you're appealing to like random chance, which is actually just the will of God. right? But it's in a way that takes yourself totally out of it, right? It's the roll of the dice or the cast or the drawing of straws or whatever. This is all a form of casting lots. So that idea that the lots reveal some sort of hidden will of God, right? That is in a sense, uncontrollable by conventional means or uncalculatable by conventional means, right? You can't really, you're not going to know how the dice are going to fall. That kind of gives us some insights into using the lots, especially in horary and natal astrology, where they're most frequently used. And basically, what you're doing is you're finding these mathematical points that are a focalization of the relationship between the planets and the ascendant, because most lots are cast from the ascendant, but in theory you could cast them from literally any point. And that's why it's easy to invent new lots. And once you get comfortable with lots, for those watching this, I recommend inventing your own lots and testing them out. It's just, you have to understand the logic of it, right? Like, what two planets would come together to signify somebody's home, let's say, like their dwelling place. I thought about this once, and I figured Saturn and the moon would maybe signify that, right? And I tested it out a little bit, and it seemed to work. And I recently discovered an older author, like a classical author, giving, I think, that same formula.
Okay.
That I had come to myself. So it's just simple astrological logic, right? What two planets, or rather what 3 points, would come together to symbolize, whatever the subject is you're wanting to investigate?
I think Saturn and Moon is there for expedition, and I think it's in the. If I'm not wrong, I think it's in the text.
From which text?
It's from Hephaestion of Thebes, if I'm not wrong.
Oh, okay.
So this is a compilation or a table that is given in Benjamin Dykes' translation.
Oh, okay.
Astrologicum.
So the other part of this is that different authors will say different things. Like, I'm looking at a lot for real estate according to the author Hermes, and this is in Al-Biruni's list, for example, and it's that exact lot I just talked about, from Saturn to the moon, projected from the ascendant. So different authors will give, and sometimes the same calculation will be used for different subjects too. So you just kind of have to choose what's logical in the moment and what makes sense in the moment. But I think that the lots, rather than having like a list of software, or given by a software, let's say, that gives you all the lots that you need for a chart, that kind of takes away from the divinatory spirit of them. Basically, you should calculate a lot based more on the consultation. You should cast that lot. You should cast that lot based on the needs of the client, and whether it's a horary or a natal chart. Because the idea here is that the lot is going to give you something to help you tie together your judgment, especially when we're talking about, predictive astrology, but even when we're talking about more subtle psycho-spiritual forms of analyzing the chart, if you want to understand, like the lot of fortune, for example, the most, primary of the lots, you can use it to predict wealth, to help you predict the wealth of the person, the luck of the person, and even the fame of the person and things like this. But you could also use it psychologically to understand how the person feels happiness, just like a basic sense of happiness, in kind of everyday life, and so on and so forth, like things they like to do that bring them joy. And, if you find that that lot is with, say, Saturn, or, a challenging planet, right? They may have a hard time being happy. They may have a hard time just sort of, doing things that just are fun and bring them a sense of being alive and joy and whatnot. So there are lots of ways, lots of ways to use these lots, right? It doesn't have to be just predictive, but I think the point is that they sort of tie things together in a more focalized, concise way, right? Like you may have a great sun and moon and you may have a strong ascendant and stuff. But what happens when these three come together in a single mathematical point that is supposed to tell you, basically is supposed to reveal like the summation of their relationship? Because sun and moon, the essence of life, and then added to the ascendant, right? The ascended, the soul, self, spirit, in body, incarnation, that point that individualizes you. So where does your lot of fortune end up? What is the epitome of that relationship between those three bodies? So the lots are very powerful things, and arguably the lots are actually better for specific topics than even the houses, right? Like, for example, we can take the seventh house and say, well, it refers to, marriage, obviously, the other person that you're in a relationship with, a business partner, sexual desires and activities, opponents, unknown places that you're headed towards, and there's even a few other things that it might refer to. Those are the main things, right? So that's like a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff. And each house has a lot of things it symbolizes. So with the lots, we can just calculate the lot of marriage and delineate it just for marriage, right? We don't have to get caught up in, but it also means these like 6 other things, right? Or we can cast a lot that would have to do with, maybe opponents or other kinds of partnerships or something like that. Or, again, the third house is a good example, because the third house will signify siblings, short journeys, writings, entertainments, efforts, studies of like initiatory texts. That's a lot of different things. So if we have a specific lot for each of those topics, right, then we can compare the third house and the third lord to the lot of siblings, or we compare the third house and the third lord to a lot dealing with studies, or dealing with short journeys, or whatever, what have you. And you can do that for, all the houses, because they all have multiple meanings. So the lots really focus our ability to delineate a specific topic.
I think lots also kind of uncover the most mysterious or hidden area of a chart relating to a specific topic that we are looking at. So if we are trying to invent a new lot for a specific topic of your life, I think the planets that you are utilizing and the topic should fall in line, and there should be a lot of relation between those planets and the specific topic that we are looking at. So if you're talking about a lot of marriage, it is almost imperative to understand that we need Venus for sure. So
Right.
in Hephaestion we saw that Saturn and Moon are used for expedition, and expedition is that kind of a thing where we are going in search of something which might include a lot of emotional challenges and also physical challenges, where we have issues, a lot of issues related to difficulties in daily life. So, and Saturn kind of directly relates to difficulty, and Moon signifies all our basic comforts. So in an expedition, it is almost easy to understand that we might be bereft of the basic essentials that we need in our daily life. So I think
Sure.
that is how we need to start inventing some lots. If you're trying to do so, it's important to find out a relationship between the lot and the planets that we are involving in that particular lot. So I think that's where the logic really matters.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it might not work in your practical experience.
Yeah, cool. And I just wanted to share the screen real quick, because I've got this great resource up here, which is on SkyScript, and it's a free resource. Al Baruni's list of parts, compiled and annotated by Deborah Holding. And it just gives you like all these different parts for all these different subjects. So, we've got, like, for example, again, like seventh house. Look at all the lots we have for seventh house topics. We even have sons-in-law, which is interesting. and why that would fall under the seventh, I don't really know, but we've got intercourse, unchastity, and chastity, right? Marriage, trickery and deception of men and women, right? So interesting. Eighth house, right? We've got death, danger and violence, and so on. But we've also got, for eighth house, the eighth house also deals with like inheritance and things like that. So I'm sure there's a lot for that somewhere as well. Ninth house, we've got journeys, deep reflection, understanding and wisdom, right? Knowledge, whether true or false. That's good in a horary chart, especially, and so on and so forth, right? You'll just find so many lots. And here we've got the key lots for the planets. There's one for each planet. So the fortune is like the moon, spirit, or daimon is like the sun. This one is like Venus. This one is like Mercury. This one is like Saturn. This one is like Jupiter. And this one is like Mars. And so these are pretty cool. There's a lot of like rich psychological and predictive stuff you can mine out of these 7 major lots. And then down here, we've got, some extra stuff as well. But I like this here. This is always fun to look at. Lots relating to prognostications of crops. So we've got lots for wheat, barley, rice, right, lentils, and all kinds of stuff that you can especially use in a horary chart or in a revolution of some kind, meaning a solar return. Mm-hmm. Or even to see if somebody came to you and they were a farmer and they were like, well, I'm thinking about growing lentils. Like, will I be successful growing lentils? You could look and see if this lot of lentils is well placed in their chart and well aspected and so on. And the Lord is in good.
You can have lots for almost.
Yeah. But what I wanted to point out real quick is that R means reverses by night, and S means, I guess, it doesn't reverse, or it's like stationary or whatever. And a quick way to calculate this stuff is that this formula is kind of odd looking, but it's easier if you understand it this way. You always start with the planet that's last here in the formula. So minus Jupiter means you'll start with Jupiter and go from Jupiter to Saturn and then add that to the ascendant. But there's another way to do it that makes this even simpler, and you can do it more quickly by, especially if you don't have softwares and stuff. And I recommend not relying too heavily on softwares for calculations like this. You should get used to just doing it in your head mathematically if you can. But basically, so we'd start with Jupiter and go to Saturn and add that to the ascendant. However, if Jupiter was past the point of 180 degrees of Saturn, meaning that, let's say Saturn's in Aries and Jupiter's in Libra, right? If Saturn's at like 1 degrees Aries and Jupiter is now at 2 degrees Libra, right? It's 1 degree past the 180 mark. So it's waning back, heading back towards Saturn. Then you want to subtract the distance from the ascendant. Okay. Because basically you can add 181 degrees to the ascendant. Okay. You can add 181 degrees to the ascendant, or you can subtract 179 degrees from the ascendant. And admittedly, that's not the best example, because it would actually be easier to just add 180 and then subtract 1. Okay. But like in a situation where, let's say planet, let's say like in the lot of fortune, this is easier to think about. Let's say the moon is like 30 degrees from conjoining the sun. So the moon is waning and it's going to conjoin the sun in 30 degrees, right? Well, instead of adding 330 degrees to the ascendant, which is kind of a confusing thing to do, all you have to do is subtract 30 degrees from the ascendant, right? Because 330 degrees plus the ascendant versus the ascendant minus 30 degrees, those are going to yield the same thing. So this is how I do it in my mind, because I calculate a lot of these just in my head. I don't use a software oftentimes. And again, that brings me back. I'm going to stop the share.
Okay.
That brings me back to the aspect of these lots, especially in horary astrology, but also in a natal consultation, because a natal consultation is taking place in the moment. You know, you're looking at things relative to that person in that moment, whether you're preparing or having it live with them, it doesn't matter. You don't need to have a list of lots. Instead, you need to think about, what lot do I need to look at based on what I'm seeing already. And that is a divinatory kind of art of casting the lots in the chart to better understand what you need to understand, you know, to see if it gives you some other piece of information or reveals something that you had an inkling about but wanted to confirm. So in that respect, you know, they can really be employed very improvisationally and whatnot. You know, you don't need to know where they all are. That's not the point of them. There are hundreds of them. You could never know where they all are in a chart. You know, so I think that pretty much sums up what I have to say about lots.
So in my practical experience of using lots, I think it kind of uncovers a lot of things that we are kind of blind to at many stages, because we might never know when if a marriage occurs in the period of in a period that is ruled by the eighth house or eighth lord, we might not have any direct information as to why it happens. But if you find out, you might find the lot of marriage is placed in the eighth house. So those are some of the interesting points or interesting realizations that we might have, especially in the natal context of doing astrology. So I think we'll get back with annual profections in the next video, and then
it will
be zodiacal releasing, and that will be the end of this series. So
great.
So thank you so much, and we'll see you again.